Chapter 16. Here is what Mason tells Dixon of how Rebecca and he first met. Not yet understanding the narrative lengths Mason will go to avoid betraying her, Dixon believes every word. 'Twas at the annual cheese rolling at the parish church in Randwick, a few miles the other side of Stroud, and May Day as well in its full English glory, Mason's baptismal day, its own breath being drawn again and again across the brooksides, copses and fields, heated, fragrant. Every young woman for miles around would be there, although Mason adopted a more scientific motive, that of wishing to see at first hand a much-rumoured prodigy, styled the octuple Gloucester, a giant cheese, the largest known in the region, perhaps in the kingdom. Some considered it an example of reason run amok, an unreflective vicar worshipping at the wrong altar, having convinced local cheesemen to pool their efforts in accomplishing the feat. Scaled up from the dimensions of the classic single Gloucester, not only in thickness but actually octupled in all dimensions, making it more like a 112-fold or quincentenary duodecimal Gloucester, running to nearly 4 tons in weight when green, and even after shrinkage towering 10 feet high by the time it emerged from the shed, built at the outskirts of town especially for this unprecedented casefaction. The extraordinary cheese, as it slowly aged, had already provided material for months of public rumour. In recent days, trying to contain their impatience, crowds had begun to gather outside the shed entrance as if a royal birth were imminent. As gatherings of the people in this part of England often produced gastro-spiritual distress among the clothiers, there were also on hand a small body of light cavalry. When the cheese was at last carefully rolled into public view, those who were there remember a collective gasp, a beat of silence. Then, well, I knew it was going to be big, but however they're going to get it up to the church. Wonder what it tastes like. Traditionally, the cheese is to be blessed and ritually rolled thrice round the churchyard and thence down a hill. Ordinary-sized double Gloucesters were carried to the site in wheeled litters of some antiquity, though such clearly for this behemoth would not do. Someone finally located a gigantic Cotswold wagon, painted brick red and sky blue, as were the spokes and rims respectively of its wheels. The cheese, in equally vivid orange yellow, had then to be carefully rolled off a kind of dock and on into the bed of the wagon, where, like some dangerous large animal, it was secured with stout cables in an erect position. As the sides of the wagon were of spindles and not planks, the cheese was visible to onlookers in its full circumference. The progress to Randwick Church was a spectacle long to be remembered. Neighbour folk of all conditions lined the route, at first as the great cheese swayed and loomed into view, silently in awe, then presently as if strangely calmed by the beams of a luminary rising anew above each dip in the road, calling out to the cheese and its conveyors, calls which after not too long became huzzas and even hosannas. Drinkers tumbled out of the alehouses and toasted the majestic food product as it passed. "Let's have 3 cheers for the great Octobal, lads!" Girls blew kisses. Local youths from time to time would spring aboard to help steady the cargo when the road surface became difficult, able to tell one day of how they had escorted the great cheese upon its journey, that famous 1st of May, singing, "Here's to the great Octobal, boys, the monster cheese of fame. Let's cheer it with a thunderous noise, then twice more round the same. Oh, the bells shall ring and the guns shall roar for the wonderful Octobal galore. Aye, all the lads who push and who pull, every master, every pupil, singleton and married couple. Aye, at window, door and loophole, every minim, drab and scruple of their praise is thine octuple." Of course, Mason was here hoping to see Susanna Peach, even if it had to be from a distance, surrounded by cousins and friends. She would appear, as always, in silk. Her father, Samuel Peach, was a silk merchant of some repute and a growing power within the East India Company. Mason imagined her brought bolts of it by Indians queued up in bright livery, silks without limit from the furthest of the far eastern lands. The house in Pynchon, Hampton, soon draped everywhere in bright, spilled, intriguingly wrinkled yards of silk stuffs, and 100 mirrored candles casting upon it the fatty yellow light of a tropical sun. Savage flowers of the Indies, demure blooms of the British garden, stripes and tartans, foreign colours undreamed of in Newton's prismatics, damasks with epic length oriental tales woven into them, requiring hours of attentive gazing, whilst the light at the window went changing so as to reveal newer and deeper labyrinths of event. Velvets whose grasp of incident light was so predatory and absolute that one moved closer to compensate for what was not being reflected, till it felt like being drawn oneself inside the unthinkable contours of an invisible surface. She could distinguish Shantung from Tosa and Pongi, often being quite passionate in her preferences. "Would you like to learn silk, Charles? It might mean Aleppo instead of India. Would that disappoint you?" "No, miss." He had visited her house when she wasn't there. He had entered her room. He had knelt by her bed and pressed his face to the counterpane of silk to inhale what he could of her scent. In the sewing room, from down at surface level, he imagined from the silk strewn so carelessly a terrain steeply wrinkled into mountainsides and ravines, through which passed dangerous silk route shortcuts, down upon which, with the patience of reptiles, bands of armoured men in colourful costume gazed and waited to kidnap and unspeakably mistreat beautiful young silk heiresses. Today he felt more than usually glum. His father's birthday gift to him had been a day off from duties at the mill. All round him, everybody else his age was flirting, chasing and larking, whilst he trudged about, waiting at last only for the giant cheese, which had been due to arrive actually some while ago. Susanna, as the daughter of a local dignitary, might be accompanying it upon its journey, or might have stayed home altogether. He could see no one withal who was not by this point paired off. Not much use in staying, he supposed. He started down the hillside by the church, planning at the bottom to pick up the road back into Stroud, incompletely attentive to the slow crescendo of cheering from the crowd above and the wave of children spilling down the hill and the first cries of warning. As he had learned later, the vicar had decided for reasons of safety to roll nothing greater than a double Gloucester down the hill, yet, as if ordained by some invariance in the day's angular momentum, the dragon shoe on one side of the octuple's wagon broke away, causing the conveyance to slew and slip down the side of a hummock, and at last tip over, launching the cheese into the air, just before the wagon in its catapult fell over with a great creak and jangle, wheels a spin, as meanwhile the enormous cheese was hitting the slope perfectly vertical, bouncing once, startling orange against the green hillside, and beginning to roll, gathering speed. The first peripheral impression Mason had of it was of course a stargazer's, thinking, why, the moon isn't supposed to be out, nor full, nor quite this bright shade of yellow, nor, for that matter, to be growing in size this way, about then smoking belatedly where he was and what was about to happen. Ah, mercy! He threw his arms in front of his face and succumbed before the cylindrical onslaught, with a peculiar horror at having been singled out for misadventure. The victim of a cheese malevolent being his last thought, before abrupt rescue by way of a stout shove, preceded by an energetic rustling of taffeta. As he went toppling onto his face, grass up his nose, hearing through his belly the homicidal ponderosity roll by without the interruption of a flattened mason to divert it from its destiny. As he arose, slowly, holding his head, blowing out alternate nostrils, her voice reached him first. "Were it night time, sir? I'd say you were out stargazing." She put upon her R the same vigorous edge as her father on a difficult day. Withal, stargazing in those parts was a young man's term for masturbating. He might have said something then to regret forever, but her looks had him stupefied. If she was not, like Susanna, a classic English rose, neither was she any rugged blossom of the heath. He found himself staring at the shape of her mouth, her lips slightly apart, in an inquiry that just failed to be a smile, like a gatekeeper about to have a word with him. What shadowed gates lay at her back, what mystic residence? "My wish too intently these days," he declares to Dixon when it is possible to do so, is to repaint the scene so that she might bear somehow her fate in her eyes, her fate in her face, eyes guarded, searching for small injustices to respond to because she cannot bear to what she knows will befall her. Yet Rebecca's innocence of mortality kept ever intact. Oh, shall this divide my heart? She saw nothing that May Day but life ahead of her. There are no records of her in Gloucestershire, interrupts Uncle Ives. What? None? Shall none ever appear? With respect to your faith in the as yet unmaterialised, Mason was baptised at Sapperton Church, as were his children. Yet he and Rebecca were not married there. So mayn't they have met elsewhere as well, even at Greenwich? Unless ghosts are double, one walking, the other still, the twins propose. Country wife, open and fair. City wife, a creature of smoke, soot, intrigue, purposes unuttered. Her plainly visible phantom attends Mason as if he were a commissioner of unfinished business, representing Rebecca at her most vital and beloved. Is this, like the bread and wine, a kindness of the Almighty, sparing him a sight he could not have abided? What might that be, too merciless to bear? At times he believes he has almost seen black fumes welling from the surface of her apparition, heard her voice thickening to the timbres of the beasts, the serpents of hell, real and swift, lying just the other side of her shadow. The smell of them in their long, cold waiting. He gazes at such moments, feeling pleasurably helpless. She occupies now an entirely new angular relation to mercy, to those refusals among the living to act on behalf of death or its everyday coercions, wages too low to live upon, laws written by owners, infantry, bailiffs, prison, death's thousand metaphors in the world. As if the instant of her passing over, having acted as a lens, the rays of her soul have undergone moral refraction. He tries teasing her with his earthbound despair, measuring angles among illuminated points. There must be more to it, Becca. You see them as they are. You must. Oh, Charlie. Must? Laughter does not traverse easily the baffling of death, yet he cannot harden his heart enough to miss the old note within. 'Tis sure, 'tis his own Rebecca. Her voice affects him like music in F-sharp minor, drawing him to the dire promise. You believed, when you were a boy, that the stars were souls departed, and you that they were ships at anchor. She had once, as our sky a harbour to travellers from everywhere. Look to the earth, she instructs him, belonging to her as I do. I know she lives, and that here upon this volcano in the sea, close to the forces within, even you, Maupery, may learn of her telluric secrets you could never guess. I've betrayed you, he cries. Ah, I should have. Lit candles? I am past light. Prayed for me every day? I am outside of time. Good living Charles, good flesh and blood. Between them now, something like a wind is picking up speed and beginning to obscure his view of her. She bares her teeth and pales and turns, drifting away, evaporating before she is halfway across the slain forest. Erect after her dear flesh, impossible to him till resurrection day, he returns to his bedclothes. In the crepuscule, masculine's observing suit is edging into visibility. Great waves of melancholy syncopating the Atlantic counterparts not far away surge against him. They might drown him or bear him up. He lies not caring, and fails to find sleep again. Masculine on the other side of the tent slumbers till midday. Hello, Mason. Was that you coming in about dawn? Not I, unpremeditatedly. Might it have been Data, do you think? Data? Why would he be in the tent? The wind. Ah, that is, of course. He's not Data. At least not any more, he isn't. Mason recalls that he has never met the German face to face. How is the project for his release getting on? 'Tis someone else. You may be confused. Pray, erase Data from your mind, and I shall be much obliged. Mason, understanding little enough already, still resounding up and down his centre line with Rebecca's visit, is abruptly certain that Data is a ghost as well. How wise would it be, however, to share this revelation with Masculine? He is well, I trust, keeping at it for reasons he sees only after he has spoken. Well? What are you saying, Mason? To be not well over here is to be dead. How you have avoided that fate indeed puzzles me. Which leaves you. Are you well, Masculine? 'Tis Data who's in peril here. Medically I cannot speak, yet as one of the Lord's menials I see his soul insulted in ways souls do not bear readily. Why did you not rather ask after him? His fate has consequences with my own. Mason has begun in recent days hearing in the wind entire orchestral performances of music distinctly not British. Viennese, perhaps, Hungarian, even Moorish. He finds he cannot concentrate. The wind seems to be blowing crosswise to the light incoming from Sirius, producing false images as if, in Bradley's metaphor for the aberration, the vehicle, wind, has broken through some barrier and entered the no-nonsense regime of the tenor, light, whilst remaining attached to it. As supernatural as a visitant from the regime of death to the sunny colony of life, to be metaphorical about it. I think the two of ye need some time together, Mason, with what remains of good sense, suggests. And to be honest, I haven't your resistance to this wind. It is driving me insane, his stomach warning him not to add, you are driving me insane. He runs without delay down to the shingle and begins assembling a signal fire, using his coat to fan it, advising any coasters that may come by of his need of passage to the leeward side. The price will be more or less criminal. Masculine waves goodbye from the ridge. He wears a canary coat and breeches Mason has never observed him in before, a wig that even at this distance causes a contraction of the pupils, and a hat, more obscurely suggesting optical machinery of uncertain purpose. He seems to be on his way to the fort, perhaps into it. Perhaps that is where Data does his principal haunting. Presently a dhow ventures in, to wading distance. Good ride to James's town. 20 rix dollars. Good price. 10, having no idea if he can afford it. Only as far as Friar's Valley. Breakneck, whispers a voice clearly, though no one is there. To Breakneck, calls Mason. I've no wish to offend your companion. Done.